Take them while you can, or prepare for draft day's sleight of hand. Mel Kiper and Field Yates tell us which players could be the biggest steals of the 2025 NFL Draft. That is coming up, along with your questions, your takes, and your draft dreams live as First Draft starts right now. We are back and better than ever. Hello again, everybody, alongside the legends, Mel Kiper and Field Yates. I am Greeny. We are live with you twice every week, Monday and Thursday afternoons, live on the NFL on ESPN YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts, and on ESPN2 every Monday. And before we dive into it, Young Fielding, as Mel calls you, what was it you just said to us moments ago as we were setting up our microphones during the hectic week that is NFL free agency? Where is it that you find your solace?
I find my solace in the dulcet tones of Mel Kiper Jr., Greeny. As we are sitting here right now, we are just hours away from the beginning of the legal negotiating period during free agency. Meanwhile, as of right this moment, Twitter is down, Greeny. Everybody's primary source for news gathering is not even available to us. So how am I staying calm during the storm? I'm hanging out with my guy, Mel Kiper Jr., and of course you, Greeny, as well, because Mel finds a way to make everything feel like it's going to be all right.
Mel, how do you take that?
I think Field's got to figure his life thing out better than that, boy. I think you got some work to be done. Maybe some therapy or something.
I've already got plenty of that. Don't worry.
Draft therapy or something. I don't know what it would be, but we got all kind of action this week. I think about where we are right now in terms of these teams and quarterbacks. It's interesting. You're going in to April, not even knowing who your starting quarterback's going to be. And we talk about rookies you may draft, and some of them become starters, and some of them become great right away, some don't. But to not have anybody in place with some of these teams is pretty amazing. And, of course, Geno Smith, and I agree, we talked about Geno Smith, and we talked about familiarity, belief, loyalty, whatever you want. And that rang true again with Pete Carroll. Comes to the Raiders, and who does he go right after? His old quarterback. So it is pretty amazing when you say, if you're not drafted by that GM or not drafted by that head coach, good luck, right? You better be really, really good, because if you're not, they're not going to like you. Because that is a big, big thing with quarterbacks and head coaches, quarterbacks and GMs.
So Mel took us right there. Let me very quickly, from a housekeeping perspective, mention that you can scan the QR code that is on your screen. You can access the entire First Draft YouTube playlist. We are going to dive into Mel and Field steals of the draft as this podcast today continues. But Mel took us right there. We wanted to talk about some of these free agent moves / trades and how they will impact the upcoming draft. And that was the big one on Friday, the one that as of this moment we know is happening. Geno Smith to the Raiders for a third-round pick this year. So it is Carroll and Geno together again. Now, Field, we look at everything from the perspective of the draft on this show. Yeah. I had it suggested on Get Up this morning that despite this move, the Raiders should absolutely still be in the market to take a quarterback at 6. If they feel good, let's live in a world realistically where maybe Shedeur Sanders falls down there. Yeah. Field, what is your perspective on that?
Yeah, Greeny, I would actually bypass a quarterback at pick number 6 now with having Geno Smith on my roster. And by the way, I fully expect Geno Smith in the Raiders to find middle ground on an extension beyond this year, because he currently has just 1 year left on his deal. Now, Geno Smith may be 35 years old, Greeny, but if there is ever such a thing as a quarterback who is 35 with minimal tread on his tires relative to those 35-year-old quarterbacks, Geno Smith would be it, right? He spent about 8 seasons as basically a backup collecting dust from parts of that as Russell Wilson's backup, because Russ never missed time in Seattle. A reminder, this is almost a weekly reminder at this point, Pete Carroll will be the oldest head coach in the history of the NFL when he is on the sidelines for week 1 for the Seahawks this upcoming fall. I believe this team is trying to win sooner rather than later in an AFC West that some would say maybe the better plan would be to try to rebuild because of how talented the other 3 teams are with a great head coach and quarterback duo. I think now that Las Vegas is saying, we believe we can make a push sooner rather than later. We recently re-upped Max Crosby. We now have Geno Smith under center. It wouldn't surprise me if Las Vegas is thinking, whatever gives us the best chance to win in 2025 is our primary focus at pick number 6. That is why, for the next 6+ weeks, we'll be talking a lot about the idea of Ashton Gillotte as the 6th overall selection. Pete Carroll loves to run the football no matter who he has under center.
Mel?
Yeah, guys, I had Genty going to the Raiders in mock 2.0. Everybody laughed at me. It was the big joke of the century, taking a running back at 6. And I'm not talking about you, Phil. I'm talking about a lot of different people I spoke to. So, are you crazy? They're not taking a running back at 6. Well, Pete Carroll likes to run the football. That's not what brought Marshawn Lynch. They drafted Rashad Penny. But I was under the impression then that it was going to be Sam Darnold to Seattle. To the Raiders, not Seattle making a move and doing the things they did with Geno Smith moving on. I thought it would be the Raiders getting Sam Darnold. Yeah. Now we're talking about Sam Darnold to maybe Seattle. We thought that would be a possibility, whatever. Okay, but the bottom line is the Raiders at 6 can't be guaranteed in their minds or think we're definitely getting Shedeur Sanders at 6. Last year we thought it was going to be Michael Penix Jr. He didn't last that long, and they lost out on their quarterback. So here's Pete Carroll getting a guarantee. 35 is he said 35 in October, Geno will be Field. 35 is a new 30. So now all of a sudden you got a quarterback, as you said, can probably play another at a high level, they think, or a solid level. They couldn't beat the division last year. So, they're going to win a couple of games against the division. Still have the fourth, even with Geno, you got the 4th best quarterback in the division. So you've kind of, gotten it up a little bit. You're closer, right? You've kind of made progress in that area, but you're not ahead of the other 3 quarterbacks. You never will be. Obviously, Mahomes is great. We know what Herbert can be, and we know what Nick's has already shown. So at the end of the day, all these quarterbacks are all elite. One phenomenal and the other 2 right there. So for me, it's about now figuring out at 6, if Shedeur is there, and you already went on record, Field, saying you would not take Shedeur Sanders. Myself, knowing if Pete Carroll's Geno Smith all the way, I'm a Shedeur guy. Yeah. I would look sure, but this is Pete Carroll saying, Geno, you're our guy for now and moving forward at age 35 in October, which I said he could play till he's 40. Right. So I don't know what they're going to do if Shedeur is there, and there's no guarantee he will be. Right. Yeah, that's going to be really interesting because Genty gives them that running dynamic. Now, they didn't get Darnold. They got Geno. Yeah. So they still have their quarterback. You got Bowers last year when you didn't get the quarterback. So for me, I got to believe. I kind of with you, Field. Even though I'm a Shedeur guy, I would kind of feel right now they would go away from Shedeur despite the Brady connection and take maybe the running back to help out the quarterback.
Yeah, last thing I'll say on this screen, at least from my perspective on the pick 6 and taking Genty versus Shedeur Sanders is this. And we don't know, again, free agency hasn't even begun, but let's operate in a world where Tennessee does not have a veteran quarterback that we feel great about for the long term. And Cleveland, same situation. And the New York Giants, same situation. If all 3 of those teams, the most they do is add a player who gives them like maybe 1 or 2 years maximum of quarterback security, if they all do that, and they also bypass, or I guess in this case, 2 out of those 3 bypass Shedeur Sanders, that to me would be kind of telling about how the league views him as a prospect relative to how he has been discussed throughout the past few months. So if I'm the Raiders, I think the Geno trade signal we are trying to win sooner rather than later. Same with the Max Crosby trade because remember, the Max Crosby re-signing because remember, if they didn't give him that deal, they could have certainly found a partner to take on Max Crosby and give them plenty of draft capital in return. I just think this is a team that between Tom Brady, John Spike, their new GM, and Pete Carroll is thinking about winning sooner rather than later, even if that division might feel like the last place where quick fixes are actually going to work.
So, Mel,
I say one thing, Greedy, before we go.
Yeah.
This league is clueless with quarterbacks. It's been proven out. I did that study back to 1970, and it continues on. This league doesn't know a quarterback that they fell over. I mean, they have no clue. They grab bag it. They're here. They're there. They're everywhere. There's no feeling of I can develop or I can get this guy to improve. Yes, we have some things last year we needed to work on. I can bring him back this year. They really don't know. And I think the fact that if you draft a quarterback like they stuck with Josh Allen early on because Brandon Beane and McDermott were there from the beginning, and I was Josh Allen all the way, but people were still hating on Allen. Well, those at GM and head coach were firm. They were solid as a rock behind Josh. Yeah. Other teams aren't. There's none of that belief that we can develop and improve a guy and have the continuity necessary to allow that to happen. So it just speaks volumes to how, like I said, clueless the NFL is to this day about evaluating quarterbacks.
It's hard to do. Mel, that is the point I wanted to make here, which is I've had it, and listen, one of the disadvantages we have is that as we're having this conversation, we live in one reality. By the time a lot of people are hearing it, another reality may exist. So, Mel, in a world in which Geno Smith is the quarterback of the Raiders and the Jets get Justin Fields, which is where you had mocked Shedeur Sanders to go. Yeah. Could we be living in a world where Shedeur Sanders really slides in this first round?
I mean, you possibly could. It's happened before. I mean, Aaron Rodgers was viewed as maybe going number one 3 weeks before that draft. They slid well into the 20s, okay, that year. So these things always have had a chance to happen, and they have happened, okay? They've happened, like I say, go back to Aaron Rodgers is a perfect example of that. I mean, we were mocking him. Is it going to be Alex Smith or Aaron Rodgers going number one? Alex Smith goes number one, and he falls way, way down. So if teams feel a better option is a quarterback that's already been in the league, and we have Cam Ward becoming the first quarterback off the board to say Cleveland at 2, then if these other teams have other ways of going about the quarterback position, then fine. If they want to go, last year, Kirk Cousins was in Atlanta, and Michael Penix Jr. became a Falcon. Right. So everybody said there's no way Atlanta's going to go with Kirk Cousins and then draft Michael Penix Jr., but they did. So do these teams feel strong enough about some of these other quarterbacks to bypass a Shedeur Sanders, who I love, but I get why he's not automatic. Shedeur isn't 6'4". Okay, he doesn't have the arm. He doesn't have the mobility some of these other quarterbacks have in terms of 40 times in running skills. I get all that, but the bottom line is he's a hell of a quarterback. So who can be a franchise quarterback in this league? But I understand why people are a little lukewarm on him. I get it. Yeah. So it's going to be really fascinating to see where Shedeur Sanders ends up coming off the board.
Yeah. Final word for me, Greeny, I guess, is that if there are, in my estimation, 6 teams in the first 9 picks that you can make a case need a quarterback, whether it's for 2025 or at least for the foreseeable future, right? Maybe the Browns or the Giants sign a free agent, like an Aaron Rodgers, who's going to end up somewhere, right? Or Justin Fields goes to the Jets, as an example. If there are 6 teams in the first 9 that need a quarterback and Shedeur Sanders does not go in the first 9 picks, anything is possible beyond that, right? We just don't know how far the slide could continue if he does not make his way in the first 9.
All right, let me leave it there. Obviously, as this week goes on, even as this day goes on, a lot of these answers may come into view. We'll take a short break on that. We have the steals of the draft coming up as we continue. This is the First Draft podcast with Mel and Field, and we're back in just a moment. We continue First Draft along Mel and Field. I am Greeny. It is time now for our steals of the draft. But can I very quickly say, before we get to that, I was just noticing Field seems to be doing something a little different with his hair. And I like it a lot. And obviously Mel has been legendary for his hair, and I'm fairly pleased with mine as well for a man of my age. Mel, I'm going to make a statement here. I'm going to say that there is no sports show in America with better hair than First Draft on ESPN. I think we are the #1 overall hair pick. Mel, how do you feel about that hot take?
Well, Field and Greeny, you guys are in mid-season form. You're in the prime of your careers, okay? I'm a has-been. I'm a once was and no longer is, okay? I'm going, gone in the hair department, as you can see. But you guys are going strong. You were what I was back in 1990, okay? Yeah. All right, here we go. But now, hair for me right now, Greeny, you majorly overrated me, pal. Now we're going to get the steals. It should be our overrated guys based on the way you led into that. But yeah, Field can put that hair any way he wants. You can do the same thing. It's going to look good no matter what.
Well, so I went to the fantastic hair and makeup department here at ESPN today, and I actually got in a little bit early because I said to myself, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk in, and I'm going to throw them a curveball. I've had the same haircut for, 25 years. And I walked in and I said, my hair's getting long enough now where I can ask for the Kiper. They said, the Kiper? You mean just slick it back as much as humanly possible? So yeah, I'll tell you this. Like, my kids play with Elmer's glue a lot. There's about a half a bottle of Elmer's glue in my hair right now, but if it looks good to you guys on this show, worth every drop of it.
I think it looks good. Next thing you know, he'll be having pumpkin pie for breakfast. Okay, let's do, as promised, the steals of the draft. Field, you are up first. Who is your round 1 steal?
Yeah, so Mel and I talked about this actually leading into the show over the weekend, Greeny. Just like, we can give you 5 names that go in the 7th round or later, but, the truth is that none of those guys are going to pan out. This is a guy who I am not sure will go in round 1, but if he reaches his maximum potential, will be a player that we'll look back on and say, how the heck did he not go in round 1? That's Georgia safety Malaki Starks, who you just did not feel the impact of this year like you did 2 seasons ago when he was terrific. He was an All-American level player for Georgia. 5 interceptions that season compared to just 1 this past year. Now, Malaki Starks has tremendous versatility. He can be a deep middle of the field safety. He can hover over the slot and cover tight ends or even bigger slot receivers. He can impact the running game as well as a force player in the box. The couple things to note here for Malaki Starks that may have impacted his status in terms of being a first-round pick is, one, this was not as great of a year in 2024 as it was in 2023. And on top of that, wasn't a great combine for him. He ran a 4.50 which is not a terrible time, but it's not a great time either. There weren't a ton of defensive backs that did both the 3-cone and the short shuttle drill. Again, this is the combine in 2025. Not a lot of guys are doing much of anything anymore. But of all the defensive backs, Malaki Starks had the slowest 3-cone and the slowest short shuttle as well. So some of those change of direction movements weren't as at the level that you normally would like for a safety to go in the first round. That being said, all that being said, there's the negative side, the reasons why he might not go in the first round. If you just go back and put on the 2023 tape, you find an eraser. You find a guy that was playing on a Georgia defense that had all sorts of future NFL stars, including his teammates Michael Williams and Jalen Walker, who could both be top 15 picks this year. And it felt like Malaki Starks was the most impactful of all of those guys in 2023. So, Mel, I still like the player a whole lot. I'm also admitting that he might finish outside my top 32 for rankings, and he might well go at the top of the second round as opposed to the first.
Yeah, in 3 or 4 years, nobody's going to give a daggone about any of those 3 cones, Field, and whatever. He's a hell of a football player. He's a pure football player with a high football IQ. You're right. If he gets to the late first round, somebody's going to grab this kid. He is not getting to the second round. I can't say it, but I do think he could be a steal in the late first round. Malaki Starks, a heck of a football player. Another steal for me was going to be Tyler Booker, maybe from Alabama, who didn't do great in the underwear Olympics, right? But he's a guy, is a heck of a football player at that guard spot, so he could drop into the late first. I'm going Josh Simmons from Ohio State. We talked about where he was in August. He was kind of a guy we're waiting to see if he improves, because he had some issues with penalties at San Diego State at right tackle, Ohio State at left tackle that first year. Well, guess what? He cleaned all of that up. First 5+ games, he was flawless, right? He doesn't allow anything pressure-wise, hurry-wise, sack-wise. He's not getting penalized. He's one of the most improved players in the country, but he gets hurt. October 12th against Oregon in the second quarter of that game. He misses 10+ games. He missed games against Penn State, Indiana, Michigan regular season. He missed that gauntlet of games in the playoff. Tennessee, Oregon, Texas, Notre Dame, all pass rushers on all those teams, and the games he missed were pass rushers. So you would have had great evaluation games for Josh Simmons had he played. Now, he played really well in those 5+ games, but he hadn't before that. So you moved him way up, but he didn't finish, and he's coming off a torn patella tendon to the left knee. That makes him a guy who, to me, had he played all year and gone through that gauntlet, would have been a top 5 to 10 pick and the number 1 left tackle in this draft, because he didn't finish and he's coming off an injury. Maybe he gets into the latter portion of round 1. And at that point, Josh Simmons becomes one of the steals of the draft.
Yeah, Mel and I aren't doctors. We're hair doctors only. We'll leave the medical stuff like patella tendons to those that are actually more qualified on. But I'll give you one more name, Greeny. And I don't think he's going to go in the late first round. But I do believe my grade by the time we get to April 24th will be higher on Jack Bech than most people. The TCU wide receiver who transferred from LSU had a breakout year this past year with over 1,000 receiving yards and 9 touchdowns. Let's rewind back to 2021 when Jack Bech was a hybrid tight end and wide receiver for LSU on a team that included the likes of Malik Nabers and Brian Thomas Jr. You may have heard of them. They had 2 of the most remarkable seasons for any rookie in the entire NFL last year. Jack Bech had more catches than either of those guys while playing on the same team at LSU. Of course, I mentioned he finishes up at TCU. I will just say this about Jack Bech. He did not run a 40 at the combine. I have no idea what his specific time would be. I'm guessing it wouldn't be blazing fast. It might not be 4.38. Maybe it's more like 4.49 or 4.52. But this guy is lightning quick. He runs a damn good route. And he actually thought that he stressed the field more vertically than perhaps his average speed would suggest. The bottom line as a wide receiver in the NFL is regardless of how you do it, there are 2 traits that you have to have more than anything else. You have to be able to get open, and you have to be able to catch the football. Jack Bech last year had just one. I recharted the drops that were credit to him. He had just one, in my opinion, that I thought was a legitimate drop. He always catches the football when it's in his area. On top of that, he gets open. Is he going to be the kind of guy that runs by you like Randy Moss? No. That's why Randy is a first ballot Hall of Famer, right? But Jack Bech, to me, in the right system, in the right fit, I think of like a Sean McVay type offense that often highlights these guys that they just find ways to get open and they're terrific after the catch. Give me Jack Bech. I think he might be around player 40, 42, 43 on my big board by the time I get to April.
All right, we're going to pause there, but only briefly. We have more draft steals coming up, and we will also unwrap some potential draft gifts. That's coming up next. It's Mel, it's Field, it's First Draft, and we're back in just a moment. Here we are back, and we continue to be follically fabulous. This is First Draft with Mel Kiper and Field Yates. I am Greeny. We're talking NFL draft steals, players who Mel and Field believe will be potential gifts in rounds 2 or 3. We covered Josh Simmons. We covered Bech. We covered Malaki Starks. And Mel, you are up next. Who is another player whose name is going to be called later than you think it should be?
Bech will be Savion Williams from TCU or his teammate Bech in the second round. Who's going to end up being the steal there? But I got a guy in the second round if he's there, Trey Amos, cornerback from Ole Miss. Is he going to be there? Debatable, borderline guy, but certainly going from Louisiana Lafayette, where he had an interception early on and then didn't have any until he got to Ole Miss. But after Louisiana Lafayette, then Alabama, then Ole Miss. This season, he put it all together. 6'1", 195, 4.4 speed, 4.44 speed, I should say. And a guy who tackles well, supports the run well, had 4 tackles for loss. Physical in that area. The ball skills, 13 pass breakups, 3 interceptions this past year. Now having Walter Nolan and Prince Luman Mielen and Jared Ivey and J.J. McGee certainly helped that cornerback spot and Trey Amos, but the ability he showed this year in conjunction with the athleticism and the length at 6'1", about 195, and the type of year he had, you get into the second round, and this was the best year he had, so he's kind of a one-year guy. Yeah. And Alabama didn't distinguish himself there, had some pass breakups. Louisiana Lafayette only that 1 interception back in 2020. So here's the kind of guy, he gets into that early second round area with his skill set. He could be one heck of a find at that point.
Nice pick there, by the way. I kept thinking, Greeny, this would be the perfect Pittsburgh Steelers round 2 selection. Trey Amos. Problem is they no longer have one. Instead, they have DK Metcalf. So it's a worthwhile trade-off for the black and gold down there in Pittsburgh. I'm going to go to the defensive tackle board, and we've talked about the depth of this year's class. So I'm giving you a guy that I think might crack my top 100, but also might not go until day 3 because there are just so many of them. It's Omarr Norman-Lott, a defensive tackle from Tennessee. He played 3 seasons at Arizona State. And let's take a minute to shout out our guy, Herman Edwards, our ESPN colleague, because this guy could recruit out there to Arizona State. Jaden Daniels and Ricky Pearsall, and now Omarr Norman-Lott with several others, by the way, that had a stop at one point or another out there at Arizona State. But Norman-Lott this past season had 4 sacks after 5.5 a year ago for Tennessee. He's an interior pressure wrecker. He's the kind of guy that in today's NFL, and I'm starting to feel stronger and stronger about this point, Greeny. I get it. Edge rushers are always going to be at the top of the heap. Myles Garrett now makes $40 million per year. But we have seen the defensive tackle market really explode over recent seasons, right? Chris Jones now makes $30 million a year, a number that a couple of years ago seemed unfathomable for a defensive tackle. These pass rushing defensive tackles that have the shortest path to the quarterback, right? They're lined up a gap or a couple gaps narrower to the quarterback, and those edge rushers are becoming more and more valuable. You find a guy that can rush like Omarr Norman-Lott can, who I thought, by the way, he was excellent out of the gates this year. Still got a little bit at the end of the season, but I think this guy's got some real value in a draft class that I do think brings plenty of defensive tackle depth.
Mel, it is a deep position in this draft, and I agree it is becoming an increasingly important position. We always hear it. It sounds obvious, but we always hear it. There's nothing in the world a quarterback wants less than that pressure right in his lap, right up the middle in his face. Mel, give us another steal.
Yeah, I thought about Tyleik Williams, Ohio State, on that theme of defensive tackle, second, third round guy. But I'm going to stay in the trenches and go for a guy I highlighted earlier in the year, Ashton Gillotte from Louisville, my kind of football player. Scheme versatile. He brings it every snap. The motor, the intensity of this kid, 36.5 vertical at the combine, tells you about the athletic ability and talent he possesses. And he has bend off the edge. He's explosive, change of direction, relentless. He had 4.5 sacks this year, but he had 10 tackles for loss. 2 years ago, he had 15 tackles for loss, 11 sacks, and 3 forced fumbles. He was dominant against BC, NC State, Notre Dame, Virginia, Kentucky. Turned on the tape in 2023, and this year he pops. Going back earlier in his career, he's getting sacked 7 in 2022, 8 tackles for loss in 2021. That's production, and that's consistent production, guys, over a 4-year period when you're the marked man on that defense. Yeah. And he was able to fight through double teams, close quickly like a cat on a quarterback, and then test and show athletic ability unlike many at that defensive end spot, who you can move around at 6'2.5", 265 pounds. As I said, very scheme versatile, great football instincts, and can generate heat on the quarterback in a variety of ways. He's got that repertoire of moves, and he's got bend off the edge. I like this kid. We're talking about third round steal fielding for an Ashton Gillotte. I didn't put him in a day 3 category. We'll get to our day 3 steals in a second. But in the third round, if you can get an Ashton Gillotte, I think you got a guy who's going to help your defensive line, help your pass rush, and be a guy you can rotate in, and he'll get immediate production as a rookie in the National Football League.
Yeah, Mel, I was talking about this earlier with Malaki Starks. Like, I understand why players that make a big leap from their second to last to their last season of the draft see their stock dramatically positively impacted, right? I mean, Cam Ward's a good example. Tyler Warren's a good example. You can go on and on with players that just totally crushed 2024. Armand Membu from Missouri as well. I don't necessarily agree with the NFL's propensity to downgrade players too much when they go from a really great second to last season and then a more average or pedestrian final season, right? So that was kind of one of the talks of Drake May last year, was what happened to Drake May in 2023. One NFL season in, I think Drake May is going to be just fine, especially if the Patriots can give him some protection and some weapons. Gilotte's a good example, though, right? As you mentioned, that monster 2023 year, 11 and a half sacks, whatever it was. Yeah, he has 4.5 sacks this past year. Do I think the player got dramatically worse? I do not. Last point I'll make about this player and just this position is I think the depth of the edge class way different and way better compared to last year. You think about some of the guys that were going late 2 or round 3, much better year to be shopping for a pass rusher in round 3 compared to where we were last season. We know the NFL is going to have a lot of news surrounding veteran pass rushers. Myles Garrett and Max Crosby have already gotten some huge deals. TJ Watt will as well. But this draft class, I think, has some young, controllable cost players that could end up being very useful, not just in round 1, but maybe even to rounds 2, 3, and 4.
Okay, so these are the steals from day 1 and the steals from day 2. We'll take a very short timeout. We'll come back with the best players that will be drafted on Saturday at the NFL Draft in Green Bay in late April. Names that you may not be familiar with yet, but you will be, and you will be awfully happy if your team takes the Mel and Field with their day 3 steals are coming up next. This is First Draft on ESPN. We continue on First Draft with Mel Kiper and Field Yates. I am Greeny. So we're doing draft steals on today's program. We went through some of those who are going to maybe get drafted late round 1 and what the steal that's going to be. Then we went through rounds 2 and 3 with the Friday picks. Now is when teams really get built. Let's go to Saturday, Mel. Who is a steal that's going to have to wait all the way to the final day of the draft?
This time of year, guys, I always like to go back to August, early September rankings and see what you thought of a player going into the year. And Tory Horton from Colorado State, wide receiver, was borderline top 10 receiver going into the year. And he gets off to that start. He's a little banged up. Then I don't know what happened October 12th. We had Josh Simmons go down. We had Tory Horton go down October 12th, late first half against San Jose State with a knee injury. Previous year, he was phenomenal. 96 catches, 7 or more receptions in 8 games. He came over from Nevada where he had a great start to his career. But a guy who has the length at 6'2.5", 196, and athleticism and that catch radius that you want, ran 4.41, 37.5 vertical. When he was healthy, he was a tough guy to match up with. You talk about the size, the length, the physicality, the ball skills. He can make that tough catch in traffic. He can go up with 2 guys around him and outduel those defensive backs for the football. He did it. He showed run after catch ability. He showed punt return ability as well. Tory Horton doesn't get hurt. It doesn't miss basically half the season. You're talking about a guy who's would have been climbing a little higher. Day 3, 4th, 5th round area for a kid who has that type of skill set and that incredible productivity at 2 different schools and was primed for a great year till he got hurt. I'll take a Tory Horton in the 4th, 5th round any day of the week.
Tay Felton, a good example of a guy that fits that profile as well from Maryland. I'm going to go to the player at Michigan this past year that I know that this feels like one of those terms that is, I hope not insulting when we use it, but I use it as like one of the highest forms of praise. Josaiah Stewart is a football player, the edge from Michigan, who his length is going to be a problem in the eyes of some teams. That's why he may not go until day 3, but he had 8.5 sacks this past season. He had a pair of forced fumbles. This guy was just a menace to block for tackles of all shapes and sizes. This is a Coastal Carolina transfer who ends up at Michigan. finishes up his college career there. He may or may not be from the state of Massachusetts, where I hail from, and there's about like 3 total players in the entire NFL from Massachusetts, so perhaps I'm a touch biased. But this guy found a way to get home consistently. He was a disruptor. He was often a force multiplier. And 2 years ago, when Michigan had all that defensive talent, Josaiah Stewart was an integral part of this national championship season for them. We have seen teams that have said in that sort of like that 4th, 5th round that you are drafting guys who maybe you're only hiring them or drafting them to be situational pass rushers. If that's all Josaiah Stewart has to be at the NFL level, that's okay. I think he has even more in the bag, but because of the natural rush skills, I'm going to bet on what this player can be. I like him a lot as a day 3 value, Mel.
I'll tell you what, he's one of many. If you talk about edge rusher, sometimes they do slip through the cracks. There are other guys there, TJ Guy, Derek Moore, and others. So Josaiah Stewart had transferred in and was the immediate player right away that you noticed on that talent-laden defense. And just to go back, and one thing I want to mention about Tory Horton, because you got the Michigan Wolverines up there with Josaiah Stewart. Tory Horton, a couple years ago, beat Will Johnson for a touchdown at the Big House. He had 6 catches in that game against the Michigan Wolverines. So Tory Horton did beat a Will Johnson for a touchdown in that game and showed that kind of skill set. You said of Josaiah Stewart, these transfers, that seems to be the theme. Everybody we're talking about transferred in. Josh Simmons transferred to Ohio State from San Diego State. Yeah, Tory Horton transferred. You talk about Josaiah Stewart, transfer. All these, Trey Amos, everybody's a transfer now, and that's the thing. But a couple other guys I was considering, and I didn't want to repeat a Jonas Sanker from Virginia, maybe in that 3rd round mix, a safety from Virginia. C.J. West, defensive tackle from Indiana, would be a really good day 3 pick. Then all my Syracuse guys, Greeny and Field. Arande Gadsden the second. LaQuint Allen, the running back. Guys I really like on day 3 of the draft. So I'll tell you what, tune in on Saturday. It always gets a big rating because you're going to see some really good football players come off the board. What's that, the 26th of April, Saturday the 26th, I believe? It's going to be a fun day with a lot of good quality ballers that drop because they didn't do great in the combine or whatever. They didn't have the phenomenal year or whatever, got lost in the shuffle. But there's some really talented kids that should be 3rd round picks that end up going in the 4th, 5th, 6th round.
And by the way, Reese Davis hosts day 3. As we know, Greeny, of course, on the mic for the first couple of nights of the draft. Reese, also part of the Good Hair Club, which is an important criteria when you are watching the draft coverage on Saturday afternoon. As I think about, and Greeny, Mel and I were talking about this, and I think you did hear it prior to the show. We were trying to figure out some technology on our show before we got going. I'm putting together sort of the top 200 or so prospects in the draft. And I was telling Mel that I've kind of sorted out the first 75 or so guys and feel like pretty good about where things stand. But the next 125-ish players are much more difficult to figure out the further you get away from one. Typically, the narrower the gap is between prospects. From 111 to 112, they might be guys that are basically coin flips. What I'm finding, though, is that what we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up pushing the athletes up the board, right? It's just the way the NFL has told us they are going to draft. So you're going to find guys that slide into day 3 that maybe are an inch too short or a 1/10 of a second too slow, which is why I think you're going to end up finding a lot of really valuable players because there are teams, the Rams are a good example of them, that have sort of said, all right, we understand the thresholds and the measurements and all that, but if we see a guy who just makes plays consistently, we're okay with it because he'll end up being a big part of our roster. They did that last year with both Braden Fisk and also Cam Kinchens in rounds 2 and 3. So compared to last year where I felt like the depth really did drop off, day 3 this year feels like it's got a lot of players. So not as top heavy as 2024, but day 3, the chances for big impact players I think are way higher in 2025.
And Mel, it feels to me like we look at pressure points that come up during the course of the offseason, right? You have the season, you have the tape. That should overwhelmingly be the most important part of the process. As we know, sometimes that feels like the least important part of the process once we get into this season. Then you get the Senior Bowl. Then you get the Combine. We've gone through those. Now we have free agency going on. That's going to define the needs of certain teams. And then there's one piece of this left, and that's the pro days, right, Mel? And that's where a lot of those decisions, the kind of thing that Field is talking about, that's where a lot of those things are going to get settled.
No doubt about it. And a lot of guys that didn't run, obviously, will have their pro day. Some that didn't run as well. You look at these 49. Remember, Gunnar Helm at Texas didn't have a good 49. He says he was hurt, okay? So you got to realize there's factors involved in why guys run certain 40s or don't. But the bottom line is that running back spot, you always get R.J. Harvey at UCF. Where's he going to end up? Where's Cam Scatterbo going to go? Okay, where's the Arizona State phenom? Where's he going to end up? All these running backs. Devin Neal doesn't test great, but a heck of a football player for the Kansas Jayhawks. You're going to get some really good running backs. We said 30 to 35 have draftable grades. Day 3 is going to be phenomenal for those guys. My guy, LaQuint Allen from Syracuse. What didn't he do at Syracuse over the last 9-10 games of the year? He was a touchdown maker. You could put him wide. I think he could be a wide out in the NFL. Because his hands are great. They moved him out wide, and he caught the football and did great things. He smells the goal line. Yeah, he doesn't have great long speed. We'll see what he runs. But the bottom line is LaQuint Allen is a heck of a versatile all-purpose running back. So, yeah, there's no doubt. Pro Day's coming up. And by the way, April 4th, Colorado Pro Day, Fielding, you're going to be there, right? Watching Shedeur and others, right?
Mic in hand. I'm a little concerned about that high altitude. How does that impact the hair? But I will be there. I believe Lewis Riddick will be there as well. We can't wait for that one. Obviously, 2 of the most high-profile names in the entire class, and not just Shedeur Sanders, but Travis Hunter, too.
I'll say this. I've said all along over 47 years, pro days mean nothing for quarterbacks. Yeah. Teams already know who they like and who they don't like. Shedeur Sanders pro day isn't done anything at the end of the season, right?
Yeah.
So the Shedeur Sanders with the arm strength. Remember, Peyton Manning had a terrible pro day, right? People are calling me after that. Say he's bouncing passes, wobbly balls, can't throw a tight spiral. They were down on Peyton Manning. 50% of the league was. He ended up being the first pick in the draft. Great career, right? Hall of Famer. Shedeur Sanders pro day, to answer some of those questions, is going to be important. He probably won't run a 40, but how he throws at that pro day, I think, will be important. So finally, we get a quarterback pro day that I'll be watching with a level of interest.
We'll have that one the first week of April. Coming up, if it feels like you need a drink, you're not alone. For Mel, that's always an Orange Crush. We have our Orange Crushers of the week coming up next. This is First Draft. We'll be right back. And welcome back to First Draft with Mel Kiper and Field Yates. I am Greeny. Before we get into our Orange Crushers of the week, those little-known players that Mel and Field want to make sure get some spotlight here on the national stage, let's plant our flags, as we do every week, on our segment called We Got a Guy. Mel's got a guy. Field's got a guy. Mel, you've always got a guy. Who's your guy this week?
I didn't know where to make my guy the Orange Crusher or the guy, because I could have gone either way with my 2 guys here, but I'll go Teddye Buchanan from Cal, formerly of Cal Davis. By the way, at Cal Davis, Teddye Buchanan had 8 career interceptions. Think about it, 8 career interceptions, 14 career pass breakups. He was all over the field at Cal Davis. How would he be at Cal, right? He leads them in tackles with 114, 12 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, breaks up 4 passes, 8 or more tackles in 9 games. Auburn, 11 tackles, 9 solos. NC State, 15 tackles. Syracuse, 14 tackles, couple tackles for loss. 6'2", 233, ran 4.6, vertical 40 inches. When you intercept 8 passes at Cal Davis, and you go out at Cal and you lead them in tackles and you're popping in all those games, this is an emotional, fiery football player. He brings that edge. He's got that kind of Jack Lambert kind of fire and passion for the game. Teddye Buchanan, Cal Golden Bear, interesting guy. I'll grab him, Field, before you can. I'll take him. We talk about day 3, guys. This is another interesting kid on day 3.
I know Mel doesn't like pro days, but he likes the combine a little bit. And how about that combine for Teddye Buchanan, by the way? That is a twitched-up athlete. That much is for sure. All right, my guy is someone that we have talked about throughout this season of First Draft, because there was a time coming into the year where we thought he might be, top 10, 15 selection. It's Nic Scourton, who finished his college career at Texas A&M for 1 season. He's a Texas kid who came home after playing 2 years at Purdue. So 2 seasons ago, not 2024, but 2023, a year in which we had Michigan and that terrific defense and Ohio State with that terrific defense, Nic Scourton led all Big Ten players in sacks. The guy was a sack machine, 10-plus sacks in 2023. This past year at Texas A&M, the production in terms of sacks dipped all the way down to 5. That being said, I'm not sure that this player has changed a whole lot, and I think he has now become a bit overlooked. So the limitations are what they are with Nic Scourton. He does not have the go-go gadget arms. He does not have supreme length. The possibility of him being a top 15, 20 pick probably is gone as a result of these just average measurables. But let me tell you what, this guy continues to be a 3-down game impactor. He is outstanding against the run. I know that everybody likes the guys that can get you 12 or 15 sacks every season, and Scourton did that just 2 years ago. But you still got to be able to defend the run. We have seen teams, right? The Philadelphia Eagles just won the Super Bowl on the strength, at least offensively, of a dominant running game. So I think that Nic Scourton's rushing game value is supremely important here. On top of that, I get it. The sacks were down. This guy still finds a way to get home. We've talked about Will Campbell a ton in the arm length. We talked about it last week on the show. And I didn't feel like that Will Campbell's arm length really impacted him all that much against some of these bigger-bodied, longer edge rushers. I'll tell you one guy who gave Will Campbell fits this past year. It's Nic Scourton of Texas A&M. So maybe it was the short arm guy versus the short arm guy where the defensive player got the better end of it. I think Nic Scourton, and I wouldn't guarantee this, could I see him going late round 1? I could. I think he's going to end up going somewhere in round 2, but a player who I think has become underappreciated just because he is not, if you looked at him relative to some of the other guys like Michael Williams, who are going to go in the first round, is not as physically imposing as some of the other round 1 edges.
Mel, can I ask you a question about him and players like him? Because you know what, another thing about Nic Scourton is he's not even 21 years old yet. He's 20. He turns 21 in August. We sometimes talk about teams being a little hesitant to take a player who's a little bit older. How about a player who is younger? And this applies to Scourton, but he's not the only one. Again, he won't turn 21 years old until August, so he has room to grow both literally and figuratively. Does that matter here?
Well, I remember T-Sizzle, Terrell Suggs, when he came out, was very young as well, I believe. And I think when you look at Scourton, back in August, we thought he could be a top 15, 20 pick. He had a great career at Purdue. I think when he did it with the Boilermakers, he comes to A&M, and then Omarr Stewart, only 1.5 sacks, but Omarr Stewart's the great, I thought, LTPer, looks the part, right? So he's there, and he kind of is now surging up boards, and he's going to be that early to mid first rounder. And Nic Scourton, I'd say, some guys just get lost in the shuffle. They're good football players, but a little stiff, doesn't have this, doesn't have that, and all of a sudden now they become second rounders, some third rounders, when at one point in time we're in the top 25. That's why I always go back to those August, early September ratings, and always highlight guys that if I loved them then and they dropped way down here, there's got to be a middle ground. Sometimes there isn't that middle ground, and sometimes those guys do get, as I say, a little lost. But I'm going to go Orange Crusher, Greeny and Field. I like the OCQ. OCQ. That's why I kept him for Orange Crusher, because Q Robinson is a guy I really like. Now, guess what? Fielding, you're going to be with Nick Saban, right? The legend, Nick?
Yep.
With the draft?
That's right.
When Q Robinson's picked, that he's going to go day 3. I don't know if Nick's still around for day 3, but we're going to be talking about Nick's guy, because this is a Nick Saban guy. Nick said that this kid was the best ever core special teams player he'd ever coached.
Wow.
Best ever was Q Robinson. Then he goes and he's getting sacks. He was leading them in sacks and hurries before he got hurt with the elbow injury against LSU late in the year, missed the final 4 games of the season. Q Robinson, 243 pounds, but there's the power element to his game. Okay, he's 6'4" and change. He's got some length going on there. Add a little weight to that frame. Q Robinson showed off the edge he can make things happen. As I said, Nick said, hey, you talk about, what's that tell you about core special teams best ever? He's unselfish.
That's right.
Unselfish football player, team guy. He wasn't transferring.
No.
He wasn't leaving. He stuck there. He was a Crimson Tide, and he was a heck of a player for the Crimson Tide. Special teams and on the defense side, unfortunately, had that elbow injury against LSU late in the year. Another guy, day 3. You can find guys like this day 3. Once in a while, you can get those edge rushers, right? Remember Zadarius Smith coming out of Kentucky? Where did he go? Like 6th round, right? Remember Pernell McPhee out of Mississippi State? Late rounder as well. Sometimes you can catch a little lightning in a bottle with some pass rushers. And Q Robinson, like I said, special teams, made his mark, then finally gets his chance, and he's getting after the quarterback and making his presence felt in that area. Yes, 5th, 6th round pick, Q Robinson, I'll take him. He's my Orange Crusher this week.
Yeah, no surprise because of his special teams contributions. He is a powerful dude. He just runs through blockers when he has the opportunity to do so. That elbow injury cut his season short. Last thing I'll say on him, Mel, is you mentioned how unselfish he is. On top of that, he was a highly regarded recruit. This is not some guy who got to Alabama as a preferred walk-on where he understood he had to go play special teams to carve out a niche. No, this was a top recruit who said, Yeah, he probably thought he'd be starting from day one. Instead, he just waited his time, ends up with a solid final season prior to that injury. My Orange Crusher I'm speaking to Mel's heart right here, is Jack Kiser, linebacker from Notre Dame, who this past season gave Notre Dame as much as you could possibly give a team from the linebacker spot. All right, so when you think about a player at today's NFL with quarterbacks that are more mobile than ever, and these running games where we are stretching teams horizontally on top of trying to challenge you physically, what you need linebackers that play fast. In order to play fast, you got to be a good athlete. On top of that, you got to have elite instincts. I don't know if there's a linebacker in the draft that has better instincts than Jack Kiser. He sees the field all the way, left to right, top to bottom, you name it. Jack Kiser just simply finds the football consistently. He had a wonderful season this past year for Notre Dame, who, by the way, who was their defensive coordinator last year? Al Golden. What is he now? An NFL defensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals. It's an NFL scheme that Jack Kiser has already played within. I think this guy probably ends up going somewhere on day 3. Last year, J.D. Bertrand from Notre Dame ended up, I think, going round 6. Liam Eichenberg went round 4 from Notre Dame to the Chargers. I think Jack Kiser is comparable level prospect to Eichenberg, who was from Ohio State, or if not, even a little bit better.
What we will save for our next edition of First Draft, which will be available on Thursday, is at what age should Field expect to reach his hair peak? That really is the question. And when athletes peak at different ages, hold the thought, Mel.
I got a number for you. I'll give it next week.
We will hear it. We'll hear it on Thursday when we will be back.
All right.
That's
you don't want to hear it now?
This.
You don't want to get it? I'll give you a little hint.
Yeah.
It's about 20 years younger than I am.
That's it for this issue of First Draft. Don't forget to scan the QR code, like and subscribe to the podcast. Tune in every Monday and Thursday for full NFL draft analysis. Plus, send us your questions using the hashtag First Draft for a chance to be featured on the program. A reminder, our NFL Combine reactions, parts 1 and 2 of Mel Kiper's Mock Draft 2.0, and much more are all available on the NFL on ESPN YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcast. So, for Field Yates, for Mel Kiper, I am Greeny. We remain fabulous when it comes to hair, and we will see you next time.